This is possibly one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me. I had just moved to London, and being a bit lonely and wanting to get into the dating scene, I tried doing the whole Okcupid thing. It was alright. I honestly wasn't too active on it. I checked my account a few times a week and messaged some profiles of girls that I thought were pretty. 95% of the time, my messages would go unanswered. I'd guess it was mostly because many of my messages in retrospect were pretty uncreative and dry. One day, I was messing around looking through various profiles when I saw an extremely attractive girl and decided I had to message her. In my opinion, she was a perfect 10. Not just the fact that she was a gorgeous blonde, but we liked a lot of the same music and movies, and well, I could actually send her a decent message because of all of the things we had in common. I also need to reiterate that her pictures were smoking, which most definitely clouded my judgment. I should also mention that I'm former military and an Afghan veteran, so nothing really scared me. Here are 2 photos I received. Almost immediately after pressing send, she responded. We messaged each other through the Okcupid messenger service for about a week, and I got to learn a lot about her. Her name was Aoife, and she was from Belfast. She told me she had a daughter named Roisin, which didn't really bother me, and had a very long complicated story about how she grew up a Catholic in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and was orphaned at a young age. She seemed really driven, and had such an amazing story. I had so many questions, and in all reality, a lot of respect for her, so it was really easy to keep talking to her. After another week, we started talking on the phone, and then sometimes on Skype. She would never do an actual video chat, which at the time I didn't think was too weird. But she'd send me pictures of her and her daughter, friends, etc. For the most part, this whole thing seemed legit. The stories she had were pretty detailed, and she was talking about stuff that I really didn't know a lot about, and honestly couldn't comprehend. Then there were parts of the story that seemed to get kinda weird and didn't add up. At first, she told me she was a hairstylist at some swank place in central London. I don't really frequent Central a lot, so okay, no biggie. I just met her online. I wasn't going to head into Central to stalk her at work. Then she said that she owned a bar in Camden called the Lock Tavern and managed it on weekends, which I looked up on the internet, and it is a real place. She had detailed stories about the bouncers and regulars, etc. This didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but okay. I mean, I guess you could do both jobs and be a full-time mum. It seemed odd, but she seemed driven, and she also seemed really hot, so who was I to judge? Again, I wasn't going to be super creepy and pop down there. I just took her word for it. She also said she lived in a really nice penthouse near Covent Garden, which if anyone knows the London real estate market, it didn't seem plausible on a hairdresser/barmaid's wages. She explained this by saying that she'd fallen into some money after the Troubles. It seemed kind of far-fetched, but again, without actually meeting her, who am I to judge? I started to notice some other weird things. She'd send me pictures, and in some of them, certain tattoos were present, in some, they weren't. I figured she was just sending old pictures, but I remember that is what started to tip me off, that things were really fishy to say the least. But again, there's really nothing wrong with sending old pictures, and I had no real reason not to believe the photos were Aoife. They all seemed like the same girl, and with the exception of the tattoos and some small changes in hair colour, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. She would also send me pictures of her daughter, Roisin, whom she claimed was 14. Finally, after talking to Aoife for a few weeks online, I asked her out on a date. I figured it was time I finally met her. We were set to meet up on a Friday night, and on that Friday, she didn't respond to a single text or call. I had nowhere to meet her. By around 9 PM, she sent a text saying things got out of control at her pub, and she was really sorry, but she had to cancel. I was upset and should have bailed there, but I forgave her, and we agreed to set up another first meeting. Things from here really started to get weird. As I said, I was doing the online dating thing, and in this time I had met a few other girls. Another girl named Jo had asked me out, who turned out to be a psychopath, but that's just because she had an uncontrollable temper and was nothing interesting enough to put on this subreddit. I went out with Jo one night in an area of London called Shoreditch, which isn't too far from where Aoife's pub was. While I was out, Aoife called and texted me a few times. I basically just ignored the calls. When the date was over, I said goodbye to Jo and went home and called Aoife. She asked where I was, and basically, well, I lied. I said I was out with a friend. Aoife didn't say anything, and we talked on the phone for a bit and then said goodnight. This situation got strange a few nights later, when Aoife caught me in my lie. She claimed that she knew I was out with another girl. She knew which restaurant I was at, and the night that I'd been there. She knew what Jo looked like and how she was dressed. Aoife claimed that one of the bouncers from her pub knew what I looked like because she had shown him photos of me, and he recognized me when I came through the doors at a restaurant in Shoreditch. This didn't make a lot of sense because I didn't see any bouncers at the restaurant we were at, but maybe he was bartending or something. I didn't know. She had details, and they were spot on. This was odd to say the least. I basically told Aoife that the date was set up before I'd even met her, and that we weren't really dating, so she had no right to be upset. Plus, she had stood me up. If anyone should be mad, it was me. To be honest, I forgot what really happened in this part of the story. I think we fought for a little bit, didn't talk for a few weeks. Then one night, she called me really late. It seemed off, so I answered. She was panicking. From what I could tell, she was suffering from sleep paralysis, which I know is scary, so I stayed on the phone with her until she went back to sleep. This happened a few more times. I really had no intention to date or even see her. I went home to the US for about a month, and while we did keep limited contact, this was nothing too serious, and my expectations were pretty low. After I had gotten back to London, she invited me out. I don't remember much of the details, but she ended up cancelling on me again. I basically decided, fuck it, I wasn't even upset. We texted a little bit, but the communications really started to die down. I really didn't think much about it, and went on with my life. Then one night, I entered the Twilight Zone. One day, I was in the King's Cross St. Pancras area with a friend of mine from the States. He had to make a meeting nearby, so I was by myself in the area. That's when I got a text from Aoife. She asked if I wanted to meet up, and I figured, hell, might as well finally meet this girl. I was in the same area of town, 2 stops away, but I didn't see any harm in it. She told me to meet her up in Camden, and she'd be at the Wetherspoons pub at noon. It wasn't a date, at least in a romantic sense, which was good. And at this point, I was really curious as to who she was. I literally spent hours talking and texting to this girl. So, I don't know Camden that well, and I'm getting texts from her on the way up there, as I'm trying to find the Wetherspoons. It's right by the lock in Camden, by the way. She was telling me she's at work and in a process of selling her share in the bar, but she's on her way. Another friend of hers is at the bar, but he's a great guy, you'll like him. Again, I was already right there, might as well meet her friend. That's when I met Reese. Reese was a tall, skinny ginger kid. He was about 21 and had a thick Irish accent. I walked up to him, shook his hand, and we got drinks. He seemed nice enough, and for as weird as this situation could potentially be, it wasn't all that uncomfortable. Another one of his friends was there as well. They seemed like 2 nerds in their early 20s. They talked about football and video games, and all the other stuff 20-something kids talk about, mixed in with a little bit of politics, and a couple of random questions about, how do you know Aoife, etc. I'd been in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban a few years prior. This situation wasn't anything to be concerned about. Then I got a text from Aoife, something along the lines of, hey, getting tied up, be there in about an hour. Reese seemed nice enough, so we hung out, got a few beers, and moved on to the next pub. Still no Aoife. Reese and his friend were nice. We did rounds, and fortunately, I held my beer pretty well. Another apologetic text from Aoife rolls in. Fuck it, we're drinking, I thought, and we were having a good enough time. Reese would ask me random questions about Aoife, but I basically shrugged it off to it being one of the only few things we had in common. We bar hopped around Camden and went to the Holy Arms. You may know this bar because it's one of Amy Winehouse's old haunts. At one point, I was in a queue to buy a round of drinks and felt like this guy was way too close to me. I turned around and saw an overweight old man with an ugly brown jacket and a pockmarked face. He had a crucifix tattooed on his neck. In all honesty, a typical barfly you'd see in any British pub. I said, "Excuse me," and walked past him. We continued to drink and bullshit the day away. By this time, it was like 2:30, 3, and Aoife was nearly 3 hours late. I decided, fuck it, let's go to the Log Tavern, her bar. Reese and his friend seemed cool with it. We get there, and there's 2 Irish tricolours flying above the place. "Yeah, you can tell Aoife owns the place, huh?" Reese said. This part of the story kind of added up. We went into her place, and I sent her a text to tell her we're there. "Oh great, I'm almost done with this, I'll be down in a minute." She never came down, but this is when the story got really weird. This other dude named Pete showed up, shook Reese's hand, and Reese said, "Oh, you're here to meet Eva." Keep in mind that Aoife and Eva are phonetically almost identical names. I look at Reese, and he's like, "This must seem weird. Eva is Aoife's best friend." Now this seemed really weird, but I needed to figure out what was going on. These 2 girls have almost exactly the same name, and I had never heard Aoife mention Eva before. I started talking to Pete, and Reese started asking similar questions to him about Eva that he was asking me about Aoife. But some of these questions were getting more serious. He was asking him things like, "Do you love her?" Pete's story then starts to sound eerily similar to mine. Pete meets Eva online. She's from Northern Ireland, has a daughter named Roisin. In his version, she's 12. He tried to meet up with her a few times, but it fell through. He was invited last minute to hang out today. Oh shit, this is weird, is all I could think. Something wasn't right. At this point, I knew that someone was getting played, probably me, and I was in some kind of game, but I needed to figure out exactly what was going on. Pete and I started to figure things out right about the same time, and right in front of Reese, who stuck to his guns on the story remarkably well. They both have similar names, they both have daughters that are around the same age, with a really common Irish name. I'm not buying it, neither is Pete. I decided that the pub we were in might not be friendly territory, and I don't want to get shanghaied in Camden, so I suggested we leave. Aoife sent me a text saying she's almost on her way down. "Great," I said. "Meet us up the street at some other pub." Pete and I started walking out. On the way out, I asked the bartender, "Hey, is Aoife working today?" He responds, "No mate, Aoife hasn't worked here in 3 years." At this point, I know something really creepy is going on. We head to the next pub. I've got a good buzz going on, but I know I need to sober the hell up, and fast. I think Pete might be a victim in this game too, but he might not be. He for sure can't be trusted. Reese and his buddy are suspect as well, but I don't have any proof yet, and my curiosity is keeping me there. We walked into another pub. Reese's friend says something to Reese, and I don't hear it. Neither does Pete. Reese loses it. He yells at his friend, and his friend basically says, "Fuck you, I'm out," and takes off. Pete and I are still trying to make sense of things. I found a table on an outdoor deck. It's quiet. I can think, and I can piece this together. It's amazing how fast you can sober up when you think you're in trouble. I asked Pete if he has any pictures of Eva, and Pete pulls out his phone. He shows me a picture that I'd seen before. "Wait, that's Roisin, Aoife's daughter." "Nah mate, that's Eva," Pete replies. This is making no sense. I'd been sent the same picture of the same girl, and had been told it was Aoife's 14-year-old daughter. Here's the picture on screen that we both received. I think she told Pete it was an ex. She told me it was Roisin and her new boyfriend, if I remember correctly. I showed Pete pictures that I had of Aoife. He claimed he'd never seen the girl in the photos before. Reese was sticking to the story that I had pictures of Aoife and Pete had pictures of Eva. and that he wasn't sure why I thought the photo was of Roisin. He also kept claiming that Aoife and Eva had texted him and they were on their way. That's when it dawned on me. I simply looked at Pete and asked him, "What number do you have in your phone for Eva?" Pete read the number on his phone, and it turned out it was the exact same number I had for Aoife in my phone. If all of the other clues hadn't added up, this one sent it over the edge. It also sent Pete out of the bar as he literally jumped over a table and ran out of the door in a panic. It was actually quite a sight to see. At this point, it was just me and Reese. I don't think that he had overheard that we both had the same number for someone that he was telling me were two separate girls. I don't know who Aoife and Eva are at this point, or if they even exist. I basically told Reese that I think he's playing some kind of fucked up game, and that he's more than suspect of wrongdoing. He took offense to this, and then physically threatened me. He wasn't a big dude, and knew that if he stepped to me, it wasn't going to end well. I basically walked right through him, knocking him into a door frame, and tore out of the bar. I headed straight for the tube. I needed to jump on the Northern Line and get home. I wasn't waiting for anything. At this point, I have no idea what the fuck is going on. At best, I'd been in some sort of weird Monty Tio type catfish scam. At worst, I was almost a victim in a snuff movie. I get on the tube, and there's a guy right behind me. I looked at him. He's overweight, pockmarked face, brown jacket. We make eye contact. I look at his neck, and there's the crucifix tattoo. It was the same guy from the Holy Arms. I'm a bit worried, but I've been under worse pressure before in my life. I calmly sat down on the train. The train was being held in Camden for some reason, and wasn't moving. That's when who jumps on the same carriage as the two of us? Reese. I could have sworn he made eye contact and gave a nod to the man in a brown jacket. At this point, I played dumb that they were there. On the London tube, there's a certain dinging noise that's made right before the doors close. I waited to hear that noise, and then bolted out of the door. I ran around and doubled back on the tube several times. When I finally got back near home, I texted a friend in New Cross, and told her I was scared I was being followed. She was having a party that night, and invited me over. I really didn't want to head home alone. At this point, I think I doubled back and switched lines enough that if Reese and the man in a brown coat were following me, I'd lost them. I made it to New Cross, safe and sound. I had a few calls from Aoife the next few days, but I never wanted to answer them. She also sent a few texts, saying we needed to talk. Eventually, she stopped calling and texting altogether. I have a few theories on the whole issue. One of my friends thinks that Reese and Aoife are the same person. I wouldn't rule it out, but the person I talked to on the phone definitely sounded like a woman. Anyway, I thought I'd share. To those of you who are dating online and meeting sketchy people, be safe about it. Never let your curiosity get to you like it did me. If there's anyone out there who has any idea what was going on, feel free to share or play your theories off me. I'm still baffled by this whole encounter. That's all the stories I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers, as we are so close. And also consider watching some of my previous content. Thank you.